It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and the sun was shining brightly over the small town. In a quiet neighborhood, filled with cozy houses and friendly neighbors, a young girl named Maya decided to set up a lemonade stand in front of her house. She had spent the morning squeezing fresh lemons and mixing the perfect balance of sweet and tart. Her hands were sticky from the sugar, but she didn't mind. She was excited about her little business idea. Maya had always been a determined and creative child. At just 10 years old, she already had a mind full of plans. She had been saving up her allowance and any extra change she could find to buy the supplies needed for her lemonade stand. She even made a colorful sign that read, "Fresh lemonade minus 50 cents," in big bold letters. It was simple, but it was all she needed to get started. She imagined the smile on her face when she'd earn a few dollars. Maybe she could use it to buy something special for herself, or even save up for her future. As she placed her stand on the curb, she looked around at her surroundings. The neighborhood was calm, with kids playing in their yards and people walking their dogs. Maya's house was at the edge of the neighborhood, where the street was a little quieter, but it still got some traffic. She set up her small foldable table, placed her pitcher of lemonade, and arranged the cups neatly beside it. Everything was ready. Maya's mom, who was sitting on the porch watching her, gave her a thumbs up and a smile of encouragement. "I'm proud of you, honey. Keep going," she called out. Maya beamed back at her mom, her heart swelling with pride. She had always been a dreamer, and her mom had always supported her ideas, no matter how big or small. This lemonade stand was her first step toward building her confidence. Soon, Maya started to wave at passing cars, trying to catch the attention of potential customers. She smiled brightly, hoping someone would stop and buy a cup of lemonade. She had seen other kids in the neighborhood set up similar stands before, and they had earned a little money too. It wasn't much, but it was fun, and it gave her a sense of independence. As the afternoon wore on, a few cars passed by, but no one stopped. She began to feel a little discouraged, but she kept her chin up. She had learned from her dad that perseverance was key. Maya's dad, a hard-working man with a good sense of humor, always told her that if she kept at something long enough, good things would happen. He worked hard at his job, helping others in the community, and she admired him for it. Her dad wasn't home that day. He had gone to a work meeting, but Maya knew he'd be proud when he heard about her lemonade stand. He had always taught her that hard work and effort paid off, no matter how small the task might seem. He encouraged her to try new things and to never give up. Maya looked up at the sky, taking a deep breath of the warm, fresh air. She was determined to make this work. After all, a lemonade stand was just the beginning. As Maya was adjusting the cups and wiping a little lemon juice off the table, she heard the sound of a car approaching down the street. Excited, she stood up straighter, hoping that this would be her first customer. She flashed her brightest smile and waved her hand in the air, trying to catch the driver's attention. The car slowed down a little, but then, much to her disappointment, it kept going, not stopping. She sighed, but just as quickly, she brushed it off and began adjusting the sign that was starting to tilt. She wasn't going to let one car passing by ruin her day. Suddenly, the car she had just seen pulled over to the curb, and a tall man in a uniform stepped out. Maya's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't a regular neighbor or someone she recognized. His uniform looked official, and the way he walked with confidence made her feel like this was no ordinary visit. He was the police chief, though Maya didn't know that yet. She looked up at him curiously, wondering why he had stopped. The man approached the stand with a stern expression, and Maya immediately straightened up. "Hey there, young lady," he said in a gruff voice, glancing at the sign, and then at her. "What are you doing here? This is an official street. You need a permit to be selling stuff like this. You can't just set up shop on the side of the road." Maya, feeling a little nervous but determined to stand her ground, looked up at the officer. "I'm just selling lemonade," she said softly, trying to hide the trembling in her voice. "I've seen other kids do it, too." The police chief didn't seem to care much about her explanation. He crossed his arms and looked around, as if making sure no one else was nearby. "Doesn't matter if others have done it. If you want to sell anything around here, you need a permit. You can't just make up your own rules." Maya's smile began to fade as the reality of the situation hit her. She had no idea she needed a permit to sell lemonade. Her lemonade stand had seemed like such a simple, innocent idea. She had only wanted to make a little extra money, but now it looked like things were taking an unexpected turn. She tried to explain herself further, saying she wasn't causing any harm and that she didn't mean to break any rules. But the police chief wasn't listening. Instead, he shook his head dismissively, clearly uninterested in hearing her out. "You're wasting my time," he muttered, turning back toward his car. And before Maya could say anything else, he was on his phone, calling for backup. Maya felt a lump in her throat as she watched him walk away. She had never expected anything like this to happen. She thought selling lemonade would be a fun and harmless way to spend the afternoon, but now she was being treated like she had done something wrong. She felt confused and upset, unsure of why he had taken such an aggressive approach. As the officer spoke into his phone, Maya looked down at the table, her hands nervously twisting the napkins she had set out earlier. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but a sinking feeling in her stomach told her that this wasn't going to end well. The sound of the officer's footsteps growing louder as he approached her again made her heart race. It was as if everything around her had suddenly become more serious, and the playful idea of running a lemonade stand was slipping away. Little did she know, this moment would change everything, and the outcome of this encounter would be far more significant than she ever could have imagined. Maya's stomach twisted in knots as the officer returned, his steps heavy on the pavement. She watched him approach, his eyes narrowing as he took out a set of handcuffs from his belt. "I told you," he said, his voice colder now. "You can't just set up shop without permission. I'm going to have to take you in." Maya felt her heart pound in her chest. The last thing she had expected was to be arrested for selling lemonade. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her mind was racing, trying to understand why this was happening. She had only been trying to do something harmless, to make a little money, just like other kids in the neighborhood. Yet here she was, facing a police officer who was determined to take things much further than she ever imagined. "Please," Maya finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to break any rules. I'm just trying to sell some lemonade." She didn't know what else to say. She wasn't prepared for this. She had never been in trouble before, and now, in front of a complete stranger, her whole world seemed to shift in an instant. The officer's face was set in a firm expression, showing no sign of sympathy. He didn't seem to care about her explanation, as if his mind was made up before he even arrived. Maya's legs felt weak, and she didn't know if she should sit down or stand her ground. All she knew was that she was scared. The officer reached out to cuff her wrists, and she flinched. It felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare. "Maya," a familiar voice called out from behind her. Maya turned, and there, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, was her father. He had arrived just in time, having heard from a neighbor about what was happening. His face was a mixture of surprise, concern, and a hint of anger as he strode quickly toward her, his eyes locked on the officer. The officer paused for a moment, clearly surprised to see Maya's father. He hadn't expected anyone to challenge his actions. Maya's dad had always been a well-known figure in the community, respected for his work and his sense of justice. But seeing him here, standing in front of Maya with such a protective stance, made the officer hesitate. "What's going on here?" Maya's father asked, his voice firm but calm. "Why is my daughter being arrested?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He seemed to size up Maya's father for a moment, perhaps realizing he didn't know who he was dealing with. "She's been selling lemonade without a permit," he replied curtly, as if that was enough of an explanation. Maya's dad raised an eyebrow, a small hint of disbelief crossing his face. "She's a child," he said, stepping closer to the officer. "She's just trying to run a lemonade stand. Do you really think that's worth an arrest?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being questioned. "She's breaking the law," he insisted, but his words lacked conviction now. Maya's father's presence was enough to make him second-guess his actions. Maya stood there, her hands still trembling, as her dad stood between her and the officer. She could feel her dad's protective aura wrapping around her, and the fear she had been feeling started to ease a little. He wasn't going to let her down. "I'll take responsibility for whatever permit issues need to be fixed," her father continued, his voice calm yet commanding. "But arresting a child for something like this, that's not how we do things around here." The officer looked around, unsure of what to do next. He hadn't expected this level of confrontation, and his authority seemed to waver in the face of Maya's father's calm demeanor. For a moment, the tension in the air was thick. Maya held her breath, waiting to see how things would unfold. It seemed like the officer was reconsidering his decision. Finally, the officer let out a frustrated sigh and uncuffed Maya, muttering something about making sure this didn't happen again. Maya's father nodded, his eyes still locked on the officer as he led Maya away from the stand. "Let's go home, Maya," he said softly, his voice warm and reassuring. As they walked away, Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. She was free, but she couldn't understand why this had happened in the first place. Why had the officer been so quick to arrest her? And why hadn't he even tried to understand her side? The whole experience left her feeling confused, but as she looked up at her father, she knew that no matter what, she was safe with him by her side. Maya and her father walked back toward their house, the warmth of the afternoon sun now feeling much colder. Maya's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She could still feel the weight of the handcuffs on her wrists, even though they were now gone. The whole situation seemed so unfair. She had never imagined that something as innocent as selling lemonade could turn into such a nightmare. Her father, though calm on the outside, was clearly troubled. He walked with a steady pace, his eyes focused ahead, but Maya could see the tightness in his jaw and the furrowed lines on his forehead. She had never seen him so serious. He had always been the one to comfort her when things went wrong, to make everything seem better. But today, something was different. When they reached their house, her father opened the door, and they both stepped inside. Maya's mother was sitting in the living room, reading a book. She looked up when they walked in, immediately sensing something was wrong. She put the book down and stood up quickly. "What happened?" her mother asked, her voice full of concern. Maya looked at her father, unsure of what to say. She was still processing everything. Her father sighed and sat down, motioning for Maya to join him. She sat next to him, her heart still racing. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch soft but firm. "They almost arrested her," he began, his voice steady but carrying a hint of frustration. "For selling lemonade." Maya's mother blinked in disbelief. "What? Why?" "The officer said she didn't have a permit," her father explained, shaking his head. "He was going to take her in like she had done something wrong." He paused, his eyes darkening. "But Maya's just a kid. She wasn't hurting anyone." Maya's mother's face tightened with concern. "That's absurd. What did he say when you told him who you are?" Her father hesitated before answering. "He didn't know who I was at first. When I told him, he still didn't seem to care. He was just doing his job, I guess, but he wasn't thinking about the bigger picture." Maya's mother sat down beside them, her expression softening. She gently ran her fingers through Maya's hair, trying to offer comfort. "I can't believe this happened," she said quietly. "You did nothing wrong, Maya. You were just being a kid." Maya felt her chest tighten as tears started to well up in her eyes. She wanted to speak, to explain how confused and scared she felt, but the words stuck in her throat. She had been so excited about her lemonade stand, so proud of her little business, and now all she felt was a heavy weight on her shoulders. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly, looking at both Maya and her mother. No one has the right to treat you like that, Maya. No one. Maya looked up at him, feeling a sense of reassurance in his words. She knew her dad was right. No one had the right to make her feel small or powerless. But still, the sting of the officer's harshness lingered. She had never felt so vulnerable before. Her father stood up and walked toward the phone. I'm calling a lawyer, he said, his voice resolute. We need to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. No one messes with my family. Maya watched her father, feeling both comforted and inspired. She had always admired his strength and determination. He had always fought for what was right. And now, it was her turn to be strong. Maybe today's experience had been unfair, but it was also a reminder that sometimes you had to stand up for yourself, no matter what. Her mother stood up as well and walked over to Maya, offering her a warm embrace. You're okay, honey, she whispered, kissing the top of her head. We're going to make sure everything's all right. Maya smiled through the tears, feeling the love and support of her parents surrounding her. She knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something bigger. She didn't know what the next steps would be, but she was ready to face them head-on, with the strength of her family behind her. Later that evening, after dinner, Maya's father sat at the kitchen table, his phone in hand. He had already made a few calls, but he wasn't finished yet. The house was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator, but Maya could sense the tension in the air. Her mother had gone upstairs to change, and Maya sat on the couch, her legs curled up underneath her, watching her father work. She wasn't used to seeing him like this. Usually, he was relaxed, joking around, always ready to offer advice or make everyone laugh. But tonight, there was no laughter. His brows were furrowed, his shoulders tense as he stared at the screen of his phone, listening intently to whoever was on the other end. Maya wanted to say something, to ask him how he was feeling, but she knew he was focused on something important. As she watched him, she thought back to the incident earlier that day. The officer's words, his actions, everything had felt so unfair. She had never been treated that way before, and it was a lot to take in. She remembered the way her father had stood up to the officer, calm but firm. She couldn't help but feel proud of him. But at the same time, she also felt a little guilty, as if she had somehow caused all this trouble. She was just a little girl trying to sell lemonade, nothing more. Her father hung up the phone and sighed deeply. He looked over at Maya, his expression softening. I've made a few calls to some people I know, he said, leaning back in his chair. We're going to get to the bottom of this, Maya. You don't deserve to be treated like that, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Maya nodded, though a part of her still felt uncertain. She didn't want anyone to get into trouble because of her, but at the same time, she didn't want what happened today to be swept under the rug. What if the same thing happened to another kid in the neighborhood? What if this officer did this to someone else? She didn't want anyone else to feel the way she had felt today. I don't want anyone to get in trouble, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father looked at her with understanding. It's not about getting someone in trouble, Maya, he said gently. It's about making sure that what happened today is acknowledged and that it doesn't happen again. You deserve to feel safe, and no one should ever make you feel small for something as simple as selling lemonade. Maya felt her heart swell with emotion. Her father was right. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about fairness, about ensuring that people were treated with respect and dignity. He had always been someone who fought for what was right, and now she understood that he was fighting for her too. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Maya's father stood up and walked to the door, opening it to reveal a man in a suit standing outside. He looked professional and confident, and Maya immediately recognized him as one of her father's colleagues. He was someone who worked in the legal field, someone her dad had often spoken to about cases he was handling. Good evening, the man said, stepping inside with a firm handshake. I understand there's been a bit of a situation today. Maya's father nodded, leading the man into the living room. Maya stood up, curious to see what was going to happen next. The man was already sitting down, his briefcase resting on the floor beside him. "We'll handle this the right way," the man said, looking directly at Maya's father. "I'll make sure we get the officer's side of the story, and we'll see what steps we need to take from here." Maya's father nodded, clearly grateful for the support. "Thank you," he said. "I just want to make sure my daughter isn't scared anymore." The man turned to Maya, giving her a reassuring smile. "You don't need to worry, Maya," he said kindly. "We'll take care of everything." Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like the right steps were being taken. She knew her father would never let her down, and now she had the support of people who wanted to make things right. As the conversation continued, Maya sat quietly, listening to the adults discuss their plans. She felt a new sense of strength building inside her. Today had been a tough day, but she knew that with the help of her family, things would get better. She wasn't alone in this fight, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel like she didn't belong. The following morning, Maya woke up to the smell of pancakes drifting up the stairs. Her mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked, and Maya could hear the gentle clink of utensils against the countertop. It was a familiar sound that usually filled her with warmth and comfort, but today she felt a little uneasy. The events of the previous day were still fresh in her mind, and the whole situation felt unreal. She got dressed slowly, her thoughts still drifting back to the police officer, the way he had treated her, and how her father had stepped in to protect her. Maya had never seen her dad so serious. It wasn't just about the lemonade stand anymore. It was about something bigger, about fairness, and how people, especially adults, should treat each other. As she walked into the kitchen, her mother looked up from the stove and smiled warmly. "Good morning, honey," she said, flipping a pancake onto a plate. "How are you feeling today?" Maya hesitated before answering. "I'm okay, I guess," she said softly, sitting down at the table. "But I keep thinking about what happened yesterday." Her mother set the plate of pancakes down in front of her and sat across from her. "I know it's a lot to process, sweetheart," she said gently. "But you don't have to carry it alone. Your father is handling it, and he's going to make sure everything gets sorted out." Maya nodded but still felt a little uncertain. What if the officer doesn't listen? What if nothing changes? Her mother smiled reassuringly, her eyes filled with confidence. "Your father has a way of getting things done," she said. "And we have people helping us now. Things will get better, Maya. You'll see." Maya wasn't entirely convinced, but her mom's words gave her a small sense of comfort. She took a bite of her pancake and tried to focus on something else. The morning felt peaceful, but she couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. Her father walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, his phone in hand. He smiled when he saw her sitting at the table, but Maya could tell he was deep in thought. He had been on the phone most of the morning, talking to people about the incident. "Morning, Maya," he said, walking over to give her a kiss on the forehead. "How's my favorite little business owner today?" Maya smiled slightly, feeling a little better. "I'm all right, Dad. Just thinking about yesterday." Her father sat down beside her and reached for a pancake. "I know, kiddo. We're going to take care of it. You've got nothing to worry about." Maya nodded, though her mind was still racing. What are we going to do about the officer? What if he doesn't understand that what he did was wrong? Her father's face grew serious, but there was a fire in his eyes that made Maya feel a little more hopeful. "We'll make sure he understands. I've already spoken to some people who know how to handle situations like this. They're going to help us get the message across. The officer's actions are being looked into, and we're not going to let this go." Maya felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She didn't like that her family had to go through all of this, but at the same time, she was proud that her father wasn't backing down. He was standing up for what was right, and that made her feel stronger too. "I think the officer just didn't think about what he was doing," Maya said quietly. "Maybe he didn't realize it was just a little kid trying to have some fun." Her father nodded, his expression softening. I think you're right, Maya. Some people forget that kids like you just want to feel like they belong, that they have a chance to do something good. But we're going to make sure he knows better next time. Maya felt a little more at ease hearing her father's words. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that she wasn't alone. Her family was there for her, and they were fighting to make things right. Her dad finished his pancake and stood up. I'm going to head out and meet with a few people. We'll be in touch with the police department soon. You'll be okay, Maya. Don't worry. Maya watched him leave, feeling a sense of pride swell inside her. Maybe she had started the lemonade stand with a simple goal in mind, but now it felt like she was part of something much bigger. It wasn't just about selling lemonade anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure everyone, no matter how old they were, knew that they deserved respect. As Maya sat back in her chair, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. There was still work to be done, but with her family's support, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed seemed to move slower than usual, each one filled with uncertainty and waiting. Maya went to school, but her mind was constantly elsewhere. She couldn't help but think about what had happened, how it had shaken her world. Every time she looked around at her classmates, she felt a little out of place, like everyone else was oblivious to the storm that had passed through her life just a few days earlier. But things weren't as normal at home either. Maya's father had been busy meeting with lawyers, making phone calls, and drafting letters. He had spoken with the local news station, explaining what had happened and asking for their help. Maya hadn't fully understood everything, but she knew one thing for sure. Her father wasn't going to let the situation go unnoticed. He was determined to make sure no one else would have to go through what she had. One afternoon, while Maya was sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, the phone rang. Her father answered it, his voice low and steady. Maya couldn't help but eavesdrop a little, trying to catch snippets of the conversation. She could hear her father asking questions, taking notes, and offering his opinions, and as the call ended, he let out a long breath. "Everything okay?" Maya asked, looking up from her notebook. Her father turned to her with a small smile. "It's getting there. We've made some progress. The department is finally taking a closer look at what happened, and I'm meeting with the chief tomorrow." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "You're meeting with the chief? The one, whoa." She didn't want to finish the sentence. Her father nodded. "Yes, that's right. We need to have a direct conversation with him about how things were handled. He needs to understand how wrong it was to treat you the way he did." Maya felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that her dad was going to do everything he could to make things right. He always did. The next day, Maya's father came home later than usual. He was quiet at first, but when Maya asked how the meeting had gone, he looked at her and smiled. "It went well," he said, sitting down next to her. "The chief admitted that things got out of hand. He said he wasn't thinking clearly when he decided to arrest you. He apologized for his actions." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. "He apologized?" Her father nodded. "He did, but we're not stopping there. We're pushing for more. Things need to change. We need to make sure that no one, especially children, is treated like that again." Maya couldn't believe it. The officer who had made her feel so small and scared had actually apologized. It felt surreal, but it also felt like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Maybe things could get better after all. A few days later, Maya's father got a call from a local news station. They wanted to interview him about the incident and the changes that were starting to take place in the police department. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about raising awareness and making sure that no one else would face the same kind of treatment. On the day of the interview, Maya and her family sat in front of the TV, watching as her father spoke to the reporter. He was calm, collected, and passionate as he explained what had happened and why it was important to stand up against unfair treatment. Maya felt a sense of pride as she listened to him speak. He wasn't just her dad anymore. He was someone who was making the difference. As the interview came to an end, Maya turned to her father. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said quietly. He smiled at her, his eyes soft with love. "I'm proud of you too, Maya. You showed a lot of courage in standing up for yourself." Maya smiled, feeling stronger than she had in days. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Her voice mattered, and her family would always be there to fight for what was right. They had faced something difficult, but they had come out of it stronger, and nothing could take that away. The following weeks brought a wave of change to Maya's small town. The news of what had happened to her spread, not just through the community but beyond. The local newspaper ran a story, and soon, other townspeople were talking about the incident and the subsequent actions taken to address it. The conversation had sparked a larger discussion about fairness, respect, and the treatment of children, and people began to look at their local authorities with a more critical eye. Maya's life slowly started to feel a little more normal again. She returned to her lemonade stand, this time with a renewed sense of pride. Her lemonade was just as sweet as before, but now there was something different about the way she looked at the world. The simple act of setting up her stand on the corner of her street had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just about selling lemonade anymore. It was about standing her ground, about being heard, and about showing that no one should be treated unfairly, no matter how small the issue might seem. Her father had kept his promise. The police department had started to implement new training programs for officers to ensure better understanding and sensitivity when it came to interacting with the community. The chief, although he had apologized, was still under scrutiny. But the most important thing was that change was happening, and Maya's father had played a huge part in making that happen. One afternoon, as Maya sat on the front porch, sipping her lemonade, a woman approached her stand. She was holding a small envelope and smiling warmly. "Hi there," the woman said kindly. "I just wanted to come by and thank you." Maya blinked in surprise. "Thank me?" she asked. The woman nodded. "I'm a reporter from the local news station. We've been following the story about you and your lemonade stand. Your dad did an amazing thing standing up for you, and it's inspired so many people in this town. I just wanted to let you know that." Maya's cheeks flushed. She had never expected to be on the news, let alone inspire others. The woman handed her the envelope. "This is a small gift," the woman continued. "It's from the community. A lot of people heard your story and wanted to show their support." Maya opened the envelope, revealing a small check made out to her. It wasn't much, but the gesture made her heart swell with gratitude. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that what had started as a simple lemonade stand had turned into something so much bigger. "Thank you so much," Maya said, her voice full of emotion. "This means a lot to me." The reporter smiled. "You're very welcome. Keep standing strong, Maya. You've shown a lot of people what it means to be brave." After the woman left, Maya sat there for a moment, taking it all in. She realized that despite everything that had happened, the experience had shaped her into someone different. Stronger, more determined, and aware of how important it was to stand up for herself and others. She had faced something difficult, but with the help of her family, she had come through it stronger than before. Her father came outside a few moments later, looking at her with a smile. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Maya held up the envelope. "Someone came by. They gave me this. It's from the community. People want to show their support." Her father looked at the check, and then at her, pride shining in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've handled all of this with grace and strength." Maya smiled back at him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You taught me how to stand up for what's right." The sun began to set, casting a golden light over the neighborhood. It felt peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, Maya felt like everything was going to be okay. The lemonade stand had become more than just a childhood project. It had become a symbol of resilience, of standing tall in the face of adversity, and of making a difference, no matter how small the action might seem. With her family by her side, and the support of her community, Maya knew that the future held endless possibilities. She had learned a valuable lesson. Even the smallest voices could make the biggest impact, and no matter how tough things seemed, there was always a way to make things right.